Gangsters. My name's Anthony Ruggiano Jr. And I want to welcome everybody. And if you like my content, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. We're going live today. I hope you enjoy it. Also, don't forget to check out my Patreon. I have a lot of good content on there. Membership start at $1. And also, I have a store with some interesting merch with hats and mugs and shirts. Christmas is coming. Give it a check. So today I'm going to talk about something that I've never really talked about. And it's the human side of three gangsters, three members of the Gambino family that I had intimate relationships with. And this is the human side of them, how they looked out for each other and were concerned about each other on a different level than everybody else knows, mob guys to be, and I think that's what separates me from a lot of YouTube channels is that my stories are personal stories, about things that happened, things that I was involved in, family matters, and all kinds of other stuff that I didn't get from somebody else or read in a book or a newspaper. So today what I want to talk about is Fat Andy, my father, a situation that happened. So as you all know, or I guess most of you know, when they got indicted in Florida in 1984, my father, Fat Andy, Tommy Agro, Tommy A, Bobby DeSimone, Tommy DeSimone's brother, Sal Real, Junior Mandando, the Dash's son, Jerry Alessino, Ronnie Stone. It was a big major indictment out of South Florida, Broward County. After they all got arrested, and they a couple of them took pleas. But my father, Fat Andy, and Tommy A, and Jerry Alessino decided to go on trial. They went on trial the first time, and they got a hung jury. They got a legitimate hung jury. After that trial ended, Tommy A developed lung cancer. Tommy Agro developed lung cancer, and he profited. He cooperated on his deathbed. He didn't want to die in prison, and he made a deal with them. If he profited, they would let him home. And he profited. He gave up my father. He gave up Joe Piney. He gave up good-looking Jack, who was in his crew. All the Joe Piney's guys. Joe Piney was his captain at the time, and he get profit, and he gave them up. And they allowed him to go home. And I think he went to his sister's house, and he passed away. The second trial, my father went on with Jerry Alessino, his co-defendant, and we fixed the jury. Me and this guy, Billy Martino from Florida. He was a knockaround guy. He got to one of the juries, and we paid the guy. We paid $25,000, and we got another hung jury. But the government wouldn't let go. Now at this time, my father started getting sick. He started losing his voice. He was getting sore throats. He was having a hard time breathing. He would lay down, and he would have a hard time breathing when he laid down on his back. And we didn't know what it was, and he didn't go to sick call yet, and he was struggling with his health. And the third trial started. And he was on trial by himself this time. Jerry Alessino had took a plea, and he got taken off the case, and now it was just Fat Andy on trial by himself, and he got convicted. He got convicted the third time. He got convicted. He got found guilty. I was living in Florida at the time, actually in a hotel with my wife Alice and my son Anthony. That was kind of my dark days too. I was getting involved with doing a lot of cocaine. I was living in hotels. It was just not a good time in our lives, in his life, in my life, in anybody's life. So he gets convicted, and he's not feeling well. He's really sick. He's not feeling well at all, and he gets sentenced. He gets 40 years. After he got sentenced, I flew up to New York right after the sentencing with Alice and my son. About 4 days later, not even, maybe a little less, he calls me and he tells me, listen, you got to come back to Florida. And I just came home. I just came back from New York. And I said, what do you mean I got to come back from Florida? What's the matter? He goes, I just got back from the hospital and I got bad news. I go, what are you talking about? You got bad news. And he couldn't even say it. He just said, I got bad news, but he wouldn't tell me what it was. And I said, what do you mean you got bad news? Wow, what's wrong? And he couldn't, and here's this big gangster, can't say what it is. I go, what do you got, cancer? What's the matter? And he goes, yeah. And my whole, like, I got sick, like everything, my heart dropped. And I said, you got cancer? He goes, yeah, there's a tumor in my throat and it's leaning on my windpipe. That's why I can't breathe when I lay down on my back. And you got to come right back to Florida. So now I'm devastated. I'm like shot. I go, oh, what the holy shit, right? So I hang up the phone right away. I go, okay. I hang up the phone. Now I just came out to Florida. I'm broke, right? I hang up the phone. I get in my car. I go right to Cafe Liberty, like immediately go to Cafe Liberty. Tony Lee's there with this guy Freddie Hot DiCagilio, who winded up me and him didn't get along at the end. But anyway, he's there with. I walk in Cafe Liberty, and they're both there. Now these are both two guys that grew up with my father from childhood, right? Two gangsters, right? I walk in, and they see and my Tony goes, "What's the matter?" And I tell him my father's got cancer, and he starts to cry. These two guys, grown men, started to cry. They literally, I got goosebumps. They literally started to cry, right? And I tell them, listen, I got to go back to Florida. You're going to come with me, right? I tell Tony Lee, and he looks at me and he goes, I can't come. I go, what do you mean you can't come? He goes, I can't deal with him if he's going to die. I don't want to deal with that. I said, you're a fucking gangster. What do you mean you don't want to deal with that? He goes, I can't go. You're going to have to go. So naturally, he finances the whole thing. Now I fly back to Florida by myself, right? I fly back to Florida. I go visit him, and he tells me that he's got cancer. The tumor is in his larynx, and he's got to get. And the BOP is making plans to have him operated on. But he tells me he wants us to get our own doctors to operate on him. Now, you got to get permission to do that. So I go to the BOP with the lawyer. We request the BOP to have our own doctors operate on him. Now, I don't even have a doctor at the time. We don't have nothing. We're just asking for permission. And the BOP denies us. And the Marshal Service, because the Marshals, the U.S. Marshals do all the transportation for the feds. If you got to go to the hospital, if you got to go wherever you go, the Marshals do all the transportation and they guard you in the hospital and everything once you're out of the BOP's off the BOP property. You're in the custody of the U.S. Marshals. When you're traveling around the country, it's not like the state where the correction officers do it. The Marshals do it for the BOP. So now they deny it. They deny us to go to our own hospital, which they would have to pay for the hospital, but we would have to pay for the doctors. They deny. They wanted to send them to this hospital, the Cleveland Clinic, have a random doctor operate on him, which might have been fine, but we wanted specialists, and we were willing to pay for it, but we had no money at the time, me and him anyway. So now the lawyer has to go to a judge, and who's in front of it this time? It's in front of this judge, Al C. Hastings, who became a congressman, who when he was a judge was under federal investigation for being on the take. He was a black federal judge named Al C. Hastings, who later became a congressman, but he was a lenient guy, and for some reason he was lenient with mob guys, and they didn't like him. So we go to him with a petition, and he grants it. He grants us everything we asked for, to get our own doctor, to pay for it and all that, and the government will have to pay for the hospital if it's not in Cleveland Clinic, and blah, 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 blah. And he grants everything we asked for, right? He signs the petition, right? Now, I don't have a doctor yet, right? Now I have the petition signed, and now I have to find a doctor. Jay Black's ex-wife, Kathy, is married to this guy, Shelley, at the time, a very wealthy guy that had big connections, big political connections in Broward County and Dade County. He had big connections, and he knew a lot of people. So I go to him and I say, listen, we need a surgeon. My father's cancer in the larynx, and blah, 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 blah. He hooks me up with, I forgot the guy's name. I just can't think of the doctor's name. I've been racking my brains out for 2 days. He he hooks me up with this doctor who's a specialist on the lyrics, the voice box, that goes all over the country giving seminars and teaching medical schools how to remove lyrics and how to work on cancerous lyrics. That's his thing. He's a top-notch guy in the country. So I make an appointment to see him. I go there with my brother-in-law, Louis. I go to his office. It's in the morning. And I tell him, my father's a federal prisoner. His name's Anthony Ruggiano, blah, 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 blah. He's got cancer of the larynx. I had some paperwork. I show him what it is. There was a tumor on his larynx that was leaning on his windpipe and all the whole 9 yards. I give him all the paperwork and everything. And the guy sits back, the doctor, he sits back to me. He goes, listen, he goes, I would like to help you. He says, but I don't really want to get involved. Because, he's a prisoner. He's in the BOP, the federal prison. I belong to Jackson Memorial, which is a great hospital. It's like one of the biggest hospitals in the country. It's in Dade County. It's a tremendous. It's like a city, this hospital, right? He goes, I'm on the board at Jackson Memorial. You would have to have him brought to Jackson Memorial. I want to do it anywhere else, and I don't really want to get involved. And blah 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 blah. And I sit back and I look at him and I tell him, listen, if you're worried about getting paid, if money's an issue, give me a figure and I'll have it here by tomorrow afternoon. Right? So now I'm talking to him like a street guy, and he looks at me, I swear, and he looks at me and he looks at the clock and he goes, if you come back here tomorrow by 6 o'clock with 20,000, I'll do the operation. I said, all right. You shake hands. I get up. I run out of the doctor's office. This is in the morning. I forgot, maybe a Tuesday, Wednesday morning. I go right to a payphone because, this is 1986 now. You know what I mean? 85, 86. I go right to a payphone. I call up Cafe Liberty. Tony's waiting for my call because he knew I had to meet the doctor. I go, what's going on? He goes, listen, I said, the guy, he wants 20,000 by tomorrow at 6 o'clock. We'll do the operation. He goes, okay, go right to the airport, fly up here. I hang up the phone. My brother takes me to the airport at Eastern Airlines. Back then, everybody remembers Eastern Airlines. I get on a flight. I fly to New York, right? I get off the plane, Kennedy Airport. I go right to Cafe Liberty. Me and Tony Lee go to the Burger Hut Fish Club. Now, John Gotti's the boss of the family. I go to the club. John already knows what's going on from Tony Lee. I give him the rest of the update, right? And they give me 20,000. They give me 20,000 in cash for the doctor. As I'm leaving, and we're talking bullshit, and me, John, and Tony Lee. Now, here's gangsters. Like, this is a human experience now. This is like, here's three people, murderers, gangsters, wise guys. Tony cried. John's all concerned. My father's, all he wants to know, is the cancer anywhere else? Am I going to live? He's scared to death. And I'm stuck in the middle of this whole thing now. Right? I can't even take care of myself at this point, and I'm stuck in the middle of this whole thing. And as I'm leaving the Burger Hut Fish Club, John Gotti tells me, and you tell them marshals and them BOPs that as long as I'm alive, no friend of mine is going to die in jail if I can help it. Those are his exact words. He goes, you tell them that as long as I'm alive, no friend of mine is going to die in jail if I could help it. That's how much he cared about my old man. And I took the 20,000. I went by my house. I lived on 88th Street at the time on top of my mother. I, still with my wife and my son that night. And the next morning, I flew back to Florida. My brother-in-law picked me up. I went to the hospital. I went to the doctor's office. I gave him the 20,000 in cash. And he gave me all the paperwork I needed, and I took it. Now I got to take it back to the BOP. So I got to go now to the jail, to the marshal's office with the paperwork now, because the marshals have to make arrangements for transport him to Jackson Memorial and make the dates up with the doctor when the operation is going to be done. And they have to do all the transportation, and they have to guard him in the hospital, and all that bullshit. So I bring the paperwork to them, right? And they're in the office. There's like three of them in the office. And I go, well, I got granted permission for us to get our own doctors. The operation is going to be at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and they go give me and I give them the paperwork, and they take the paperwork and they see Judge Alcee Hastings' name, and what do you think they did? The guy that saw it goes, here, look who signed it. That figures. They because it was Hastings, they figured, we got to him because he was under investigation for corruption. He goes, yeah, look who signed the order, Hastings. That figures. I said, listen, I don't care who signed it. It's a court order, and that's it. And so they took him to Jackson Memorial. They removed his larynx. He had some cancer around his throat in here. They removed a couple of little bone spurs that were cancer, and they removed his larynx. And he had a hole in his throat. He couldn't talk. And they saved him, and that saved him. And they had him chained to the bed. When we went to visit him, they had him chained to the bed after the operation. Of course, they had him handcuffed to the bed like he was going to go somewhere. And then he got, he was already sentenced. So then he went back to the jail in Homestead, the Fed jail in Florida. And he only was there for a couple of weeks, and they had the machine. He sounded like a robot. He hated that. And I was keeping Tony Lee and John Gotti up to date on everything. And then they sent them to Missouri to this hospital. Ironically, they sent them to Springfield, Missouri, where John Gotti later died. Years later, that's what the prison he died in. And they sent them there, and Paulie Vario was there from Goodfellas. Paulie Vario was there, and they taught him how to talk there. He had a speech therapist, and they taught him how to speak with his esophagus because he had no voice box, and they taught him how to speak from his esophagus. And that's all the other stories I tell when I used to fly out to Springfield with Danny Cateo and Pete the Killer and Tony Lee and Paul Vario's son, and we would go there and talk about Goodfellas. And my father used to break all their balls about Henry Hill because he never liked them. And he learned how to talk, and how he learned how to talk, he was very determined. Wise guys are very intelligent. He was very determined, so he had a speech therapist, and he would go in his room at night, and he would talk into the mirror for hours to teach himself how to talk with his esophagus. And we bought him these special like bandanas, things that went like bibs, but they were different colors, and he would wear them like ascots, whatever they called them, to cover the hole in his throat. And he used to tease us, and he used to go, if they come to get me in my cell, he goes, and they put a pillow on my head, on my nose, I got them, because he used to breathe from the hole in his throat. He goes, I got them. Yeah. So, so the bottom line is that there's a human side and an element to wise guys, especially when it comes to people they care about. And a lot of times they do look out for each other. It's not all self-centered, backstabbing bullshit. You know what I mean? They do look out for each other. I mean, the partnership between, you want to talk about Thanksgiving, nobody was partners like Tony Lee and Fat Andy. I'm so grateful for that partnership. For Tony Lee, I was like I had two fathers. It was like I had two fathers. When my father was in prison for 13 years, Tony Lee stood by my side, paid for my treatment. I mean, John Gotti stood by my side. And I'm grateful for that. Not that they taught me anything worthwhile, but I'm still grateful for what I experienced, and and that was it. And that's what they did, and it turned out all right. And he did 13 years, and then he got out, and he passed away. 18 months later. That's it.
That's a heck of a Thanksgiving story.
Where'd everybody go?
They're all on. We're all here. Got about 94 on YouTube. Got a donation from Ryan Brown.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, we can wrap it up and then just go on Patreon.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the live. Don't forget, if you like my content, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, and check out my Patreon. And membership started $1, and check out our merch. And everybody have a great Thanksgiving and stay blessed.